Okay, chat. So as a lot of you guys may know, I covered a bit of a debate recently with a content creator. Well, are they really a content creator? I guess they do create content. I think they have like a little podcast or something like that. But in any case, a friend of the channel known as Demigloom, shout out to Demigloom. They recently had a debate with Knowles, and we reacted to that not too long ago on the stream. In fact, if you're not familiar with that, I'll go ahead and show you a brief little bit of it. This was posted on Twitter, and so let's take a quick little glimpse at it. We're not going to watch the full clip, but just to kind of refresh your guys' memory a little bit, I'll play a little bit of it. So here we go.
Hi, Michael. My name is Demi. In the recent past, you've advocated for the outright eradication of transgenderism from public life, with the claim that the supposed right of confused people to pretend to be the opposite sex necessarily infringes on your right to distinguish between men and women. I'm standing here now, a biological male, wearing a dress with a pair of leggings. Do you sincerely believe that I should be subject to punitive justice on the basis of what I'm wearing? And if so, are you willing to turn yourself in for wearing women's panties in your gay college film?
Oh, shit! Damn!
Well,
I love that clip so fucking much. She went hard. She went hard for sure. But anyway, if you want to check out the full debate, we reacted to it on my channel. You can definitely check it out. But one of the things that Demigloom kind of gave me a heads up about in the DMs was they basically let me know that, hey, that's not the only piece of content that Knowles created with me involved while I was there. They obviously did the open debates or whatever you want to call it, open question panel, whatnot. But apparently they started interviewing people as well, and they were planning to do like a segment based off of those interviews. Thank you very much for that, Twitch Prime. I appreciate it. Thank you, thank you. But they did a little bit of an interview segment, and Demigloom was a part of that. So we have this video here on the Knowles YouTube channel. Transgenderism, Knowles versus protesters cross the picket line. And one thing I will say that's kind of interesting, I don't know why, but they changed the title of this video. Originally, the title was non-binary, Knowles versus protesters. I don't know why they changed it from non-binary to transgenderism, but in any case, we're going to take a look at this. We're going to see what it is and give our thoughts as we go along. So without further ado,
play that shit!
Here we go.
When a conservative speaks on a college campus, anything can happen. I've come to expect the histrionics of the excitable leftist students with purple hair. That's just how college kids are. It's frankly kind of charming. What still gives me some surprise, though, is that the most ardent disruption these days often comes from the supposed adults who should know better, the university administrators. Just days before I was scheduled to speak at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, left-wing administrators tried to shake down the students for a last-minute, unprecedented security fee totaling well over $4,000. From me, little old me. At first, I was honored. UW-Madison didn't charge any last-minute security fees when my friends Ben Shapiro and Matt Walsh spoke there. Perhaps they were just more intimidated by my Sicilian physique. But then
this guy is just like so into himself. Like he wants to be like a comedian so bad, but he's just not funny. Like not even close.
I learned that the fee was not to protect the students from me. Rather, it was to protect me from the liberal students, who ideologically are on the same side as the administrators who were trying to shake me down. Fortunately, the group that had
I don't understand what the point of that is, right? I genuinely don't understand what the point of even acknowledging this is, because, okay, if they're interested in you potentially like being safe at their like establishment at their school, like why does that matter? I don't understand.
Invited me, held its ground, and even threatened to sue the school, which was legally bound by the First Amendment to abide by free speech. What was the result? Chaos? Mayhem? Did my producer survive the violent hordes? It all turned out great. Hundreds of people came in, they filled all the seats, and they were polite for almost the whole time.
I'm standing here now, a biological male, wearing a dress with a pair of leggings.
Shout out to Demigloom.
Do you sincerely believe that I should be subject to punitive justice on the basis of what I'm wearing? And if so, are you willing to turn yourself in for wearing women's panties in your gay college film?
I say almost.
Is that the worst clip he could get? Like, to try and show the outrage that was sparked against him? Is that literally the worst clip he could find?
The whole time, because a couple students, one who called himself transgender and another who called herself non-binary, became a bit more pointed during the Q&A. I was happy to answer their questions. So happy, in fact, that we all decided to sit down and have a conversation after the event.
Oh, so this was like, they were so interested in how, like, aggressive Demi and their friend came at them that they're like, I want to talk to you even more. Let's sit down and let's have a conversation. Oh, this is going to be good.
Demi?
Demi.
Ferris? First of all, thank you for coming to the lecture, and then thank you for your questions, and then for sitting down. I take it you did not agree with me coming in. Did I persuade either of you?
No.
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 Okay.
No surprise there.
The topic of the conversation was abortion.
Mm-hmm.
You asked about transgenderism.
I did.
I didn't persuade you on that.
No, not really.
When did you start to identify as a woman?
What makes you say that I identify as a woman? Because I actually didn't assert that.
I don't know.
Is it just pattern recognition? Do I just look like one of the transes?
You're wearing a dress.
Yo, going in strong. Going in strong. Jeez.
Yeah.
My first hint.
Yeah. Have
He's
you heard of a femboy? Do you know what that means?
Now I have, but I don't know what it means.
Okay. It's feminine men. They wear a lot of dresses. It's cool.
But
I'm not a femboy. I identify as a trans woman.
Okay. So I was right.
Yeah.
Okay.
You were
Literally just fucking with him. Literally just fucking with him at that point. That's so funny. This reminds me of that dude who made a found footage horror film in Disney World, and he kept trying to milk the, ooh, Disney's gonna sue me for publicity. Then Disney just ignored him. Yeah, pretty much.
But a femboy is different than a trans.
Yes, they are. They're quite different.
What's the difference?
So a femboy still retains their male identity and pursues femininity, whereas a trans woman actually identifies as a woman.
What does that mean, though? If you if I pursue Sicilian identity, then I would identify as Sicilian.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
But then, if a femboy pursues feminine identity, he would identify as female.
You would identify as feminine, not necessarily female. I don't think.
It's not the same thing. Like, there are plenty of like people out there who like may identify as being a man, but they appreciate like, you know, the appearance of feminine, like, you know, characteristics. Like maybe they like, you know, something about women's clothing, or maybe they like painting their nails, or maybe they like, you know, doing their makeup up or something like that. But they still very much identify with the fact that they're a man. You know, that doesn't make you trans just because maybe you like to dress, you know, in a dress from time to time, or do some makeup and, you know, paint your nails and stuff like that. That doesn't necessarily make you a trans woman.
And everyone at the Daily Wire would agree that feminine and female are not synonymous.
Well, men can be effeminate.
Yeah,
actually,
effeminate.
But that's different than feminine.
Feminine. How would you define feminine versus effeminate?
Feminine is good, and it's what women are when they act like women. And effeminate is bad, and it's what men are when they act like women.
So yeah,
why would that be bad? Why? I mean, unless you're like, you know, homophobic, transphobic, you know, all of those, you know, phobes essentially. Why would it be bad for a man or really anyone to express themselves that way? You know?
Say a femboy is a boy who is effeminate. Well, then a trans woman actually doesn't retain the male identity. And
Chasing Dopamine in the chat says she's amazing. Now I simp for Demigloom. Oh my God.
Stop being horny.
God damn it.
Chooses to identify as a female.
Okay, but then to loop back around to my first question, when did you start to identify as transgender?
Shuggin in the chat says Michael Knowles loves femboys. I mean, he is giving you know, the eyes to Demi, although Demi did say they're not a femboy, to be clear, but he is giving quite some interesting, you know, looks over to Demi, so maybe there's some kind of connection there.
Started to identify as transgender. Internally, I've noticed the sort of mismatch between my identity and the body that I was given and the roles that society has placed upon me. That mismatch was pretty clear from a very young age. I'm not going to pretend that I was a woman all along. You know, I was born with a female brain. But I'd say probably since around 4K, like school.
4K?
Like 4-year-old kindergarten, like preschool.
Okay. What do you think caused it? If you say you weren't, it's not like you were born in the wrong body or something, then what do you think caused it?
I think it's quite simple, really. I think some people like ketchup and some people don't. I wanted to live my life this way. I wanted to pursue these characteristics, these traits.
No, I'm not denying that you.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of the common go-to that a lot of people who aren't super knowledgeable of trans issues go to is obviously gender dysphoria is a common thing that people will say is a reason why people will transition, right? But there's a number of different reasons. Even me, when I first started learning about trans issues and whatnot, I always thought it was just a gender dysphoria thing, but that's not the case. There's various different reasons why someone might choose to transition. Maybe they just feel more comfortable with a feminine identity, or maybe it is gender dysphoria. There's a lot of different reasons that people might choose to do so, but anyway,
I want to do that.
But I'm just kind of asking why.
Yeah, I mean, I think the same reason why anybody identifies.
And by the way, no matter what the reason is, I think they're all valid
as the gender they were assigned at birth.
Well,
it just feels kind of natural.
When did you publicly start doing it?
I'd say I came out as trans to everyone except for my family members, because it wasn't safe in my household.
What do you mean it wasn't safe?
Why wasn't it safe?
Yeah.
I don't want to get into the grotesque details, but I was in a pretty abusive household. My father was not very accepting, but my mother.
Do you think maybe that might have had anything to do with, all of this?
The abuse and whatnot didn't really. I don't see any correlation with that in my gender identity. I could see the look on your face.
Because I've just heard
the talking point.
I've heard it's not just. I mean, I've just heard it from people who have detransitioned, or that sometimes that correlates.
Yeah, I don't trust me. I'm not.
Yeah, I've never liked this. You'll see this a lot with conservative types where they'll try to make it a thing about oh, well, this person was abused as a child or sexually abused as a child or something like that, and that's why they're gay or that's why they're trans or something along those lines. And I don't like to. I don't think it's appropriate to play with those kind of ideas.
What did I miss?
Thank you very much for the bid. I do appreciate it. But yeah, I don't think that that's really appropriate to play with those kind of ideas, because it just seems like another way that they try to invalidate the feelings that these people have and the gender expression that these people are feeling. I just don't think it's appropriate.
Not proud to say that I grew up in an abusive household and I also happen to be trans. I don't want to fuel that statistic, but I'm also not going to be dishonest about my upbringing.
Yeah. Now, you are not trans.
I am.
You're just
knowing what gender you want to be at 4 years old. I don't know, to be honest. At 4, kids want to be all sorts of things. I guess I'm a girl. It's a girl thing. Just stuck for them. You'll hear from a lot of trans people that will transition later in life. They'll talk about the fact that they realized there was something different about them at a very, very young age. Now that doesn't necessarily mean that they're choosing at that age to transition. A lot of them won't transition until much later in life. I hope Trans Girl Jade doesn't mind me sharing this, but Trans Girl Jade has shared with me that they were a very young child when they felt like something was different about them as well. But it wasn't until much, much later in life that they actually went through the process of transitioning. I don't remember the exact age, but I want to say it was somewhere around 30s, 40s, something like that. But yeah, just because somebody might feel that something is different about them at a very young age like that, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to go through the process of transitioning that early. Now, granted, if somebody is a child and they choose to transition at a young age, there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. And it's great if their family is very supportive of that decision. But having said that, a lot of people will tell you their story that yeah, I felt like there was something different about me when I was very, very young, but I didn't transition until much later in life, if that makes sense.
Trans.
You're trans too? Mm-hmm. No, you're not.
I am.
So what are you?
I'm non-binary.
Oh, all right. I don't mean to be different, but you're not saying you're a man.
I'm not saying I'm a man now.
And you would have at some point in your life said you're a woman.
I don't think I ever said I was a woman.
A little girl? I don't know.
Sure, yeah.
You did, okay. But then when did you decide you're non-binary?
I didn't know what transgender or non-binary was until I was 14, 15.
Most people had not heard of it
Yeah.
until recently.
I mean, it existed, but I hadn't heard of it.
I suppose we'll perhaps agree to disagree on that.
Oh my God, Jesus, he's so fucking insufferable. I'll be honest, like when it comes to something like non-binary, I don't really understand like what it, like I can comprehend in my mind, like what it means to be someone who was born a male and like later identifies as like a female, or like born female and later identifies as a male, etc. I can wrap my mind around that. I don't really understand like what it feels like to identify, or I can't really comprehend what it feels like to be non-binary. Now, having said that, I'm not invalidating non-binary people. Obviously, I'm accepting of non-binary people. I think that non-binary people are valid, etc. I'm just being honest. Like, I don't really understand it. But it doesn't mean that those people aren't valid. Just because you don't understand their lived experience, it doesn't mean that they aren't valid. But in any case, just thought I would kind of share my thoughts on that.
You don't think it existed until recently?
No, I think people have been confused about their sex, and I think they've had all sorts of aberrant desires for all of history. But I don't think it's a real category.
Abhorrent desires. There's so many people who try to make being like trans as something about being sexual. And it's just like, even if you're looking at cis people, okay, being like a man or a woman isn't like in itself like a sexual thing. Now, obviously, you know, people have sex. This is true. I mean, it's a pretty normal thing for people to do, but simply existing as the gender you are, whether it's the gender you were born with or the gender you choose later in life because you choose to transition or something like that, it's not inherently a sexual thing. And like the goal behind that, by making it a sexual thing, is they're trying to make it seem degenerate. Okay, so then they can kind of like try again to find a way to invalidate it. If they can make people believe that it's a degeneracy thing, then they can invalidate it in the minds of people who are either bigoted just like they are, or people who don't know any better, right? Normies who don't really understand it and can't comprehend it, that sort of thing.
Basically. So I don't mean it in any disrespectful way.
Did Michael Knowles get confused about his sex after filming the gay college film? You know, that's a good question, actually, Shooken. Round of applause for that question. That was actually a good question. It's a good way of putting it. Trash Girl Jay says, I hate Michael Knowles so much. Oh, don't we all?
I just don't think, I don't think it's possible to have a male body but be a female, because I don't think that's how body and soul or how identity actually works.
So I think what weird.
Why not?
Weasley little liar, dude.
Thank you so much for that soundbite. I do appreciate it. Perfect timing. But I don't understand like how difficult. I'll say this, okay? Before, like, I've always been supportive of like trans people as far as I've known that trans people have existed, but it doesn't mean I've always like understood things, right? But like, I feel like when you point it out as like it's your identity, it's what you identify as, it's how you express yourself, etc., it's really not that difficult to kind of wrap your head around, you know? The same way like somebody might identify as like, hey, I'm a gamer. I enjoy playing video games, and so I consider myself a gamer. Or, you know, you might identify as a musician because you like making music or something like that. It's not, if you really think about it on its most like basic, like core idea of what like identity is, it's really not that different than any of those things. It's just a case of like, yeah, you know, I was born, you know, let's say in the case of, you know, someone who's male to female, I was born a man, sure, but I better identify with the characteristics of a woman, and therefore I'm going to transition to being a woman, and I identify as a woman. It's not that difficult, right? There's been many times that Tipster has come to me asking questions. It's always best to ask someone for clarification than to hold on to a bigoted opinion that's fed by a grifter crowd. Yeah, exactly. And that's one thing that I think has been like really great for me, because again, like I've always been, as far as I've, you know, known that trans people have existed, I've always been supportive of them and I've always considered them valid. But again, it doesn't always mean that as a cis guy, like I always understand what they're feeling and what their lived life experience is. So that's one thing I've been very grateful for, is that a lot of the trans people in my life have been very open to responding to questions. You know, I think that conservatives will also often give you this idea that like trans people are very like standoffish and like they just want to find, you know, an excuse to be offended by things and stuff like that. And that's not to say that there aren't people in the trans community like that do exist, but I feel like it's very, very few and far between, because my experience, you know, communicating with people in the trans community is they're very open to answering questions. In fact, they actually appreciate it when you're someone who wants to understand their lived life experience. And so they actually encourage asking questions, as long as you're not doing it in a bad faith way that's only intending to upset them or, you know, mock them or something like that. As long as you're like legitimately asking questions in a way that you truly want to understand, you know, what their lived life experience is, they're very receptive to answering your questions. So I want to give a big shout out to, you know, Trans Girl Jade and pretty much anybody else that I've ever asked a question and they didn't get offended by it. Round of applause to them.
You're saying is that transgenderism, let's just say as an ideology, has existed for a very, very long time.
Yeah.
The first books that were burned in the Holocaust were about transgender people, about sexual studies.
Well, yeah, there was all sorts of sort of sexual, and it goes back obviously much further than the 1940s. People had these desires. But it is
yes.
I suppose the difference would be transvestitism has existed for all of history, always been sort of, you know, cabarets and red light districts and things like that. But the ideology, meaning the view that a man could say he really is a woman, or
it's not an ideology. Again, like there's so many like terms and the way they word things and stuff like that. It's very much meant to invalidate the existence. If you could just pass it off as like an ideology, then again, you can convince people who either are bigoted, just like you in the case of Michael Knowles, or you can convince people who maybe don't necessarily know any better. You can convince them that these people's existence aren't valid because it's just an ideology. That's not the case. It's just people and their identity and what makes them feel comfortable. And like I said, I've said this like a dozen times before when covering these kind of issues. Even if you don't understand the struggles that trans people face every day, or what it's like to be trans, or what gender dysphoria is, or, you know, even if you don't understand these things, the way I've always kind of looked at it, even before I knew as much as I know now, why does it matter to you? At the end of the day, we all live our lives and we all enjoy the things we enjoy and we all live the experiences we experience, you know. I grew up as, you know, a cis man who was, you know, when I was younger, I was a fan of skateboarding, I was a fan of video games, I was a fan of hip hop music, and all of these things that I enjoyed and I considered a part of myself were part of my identity growing up. You know, all my interests, all my, you know, the kind of clothes I like to wear, the kind of things that I like to enjoy, etc. These were part of my identity and it's my lived experience. And nobody would have an issue with me living my life the way I choose to live my life, right? Why do we care how these people are choosing to live their lives? It doesn't affect you personally. You know, it's not bothering you in any way. You know, like even if like, let's say I'll use Trans Girl Jade as an example. I'm sorry for picking on you so much today, Jade. But, you know, let's say Trans Girl Jade and I never met. We never became friends or anything like that. Trans Girl Jade's existence doesn't affect me at all in those circumstances. So if I were someone that didn't understand the trans existence, why would I care? It's just so bizarre to me that there are people that exist that give so much of a shit about how other people are just trying to live their lives. It's insane to me.
Or a woman could say she really is multiple, you know, they or them, or not either a man or a woman. That's a relatively new ideology.
No.
Not the behavior,
actually.
but...
We have, looking back, I mean, obviously historical records going back thousands of years get kind of shaky just because, you know, we aren't able to preserve text that long and maybe text even didn't exist, but...
They did exist. We actually have...
Not for all of human history.
Well, thousands of years, yeah, but not like...
Oh, not going back to Adam in the garden. That's probably true.
But there's evidence of people with assigned male skeletons in traditionally female clothing and attire in burial, and we have the same vice versa. People, this is one of the specific examples I'm thinking of was...
this is a common thing that they're like... when they do these like in-person debates or whatever, they want to ask these like on the spot questions. And, you know, hey, if you're like super knowledgeable, then maybe you'll be able to cite this stuff that you're referring to and you can give a quick answer and rebuttal. And like, you know, that's great. But the thing is like, not everybody is going to be able to have that, you know, type of like memory where they can recall these things just instantly like that. And so the idea is they're trying to like trip you up and make it seem like you're just pulling shit out of your ass, right? Like you're just saying like, oh yeah, you know, trans people have existed all throughout history. And it's like, well, where? And if you can't give an answer, well, I'm not sure at the moment, but I know I've seen examples of that. It just makes it look like you're lying, right? Because you can't instantly come up with an example to back up the statement you're making. And at the end of the day, like, it's one thing if you're debating someone, you know, in an internet space. You know, there's a lot of debate bro types on the internet who will do these online debates about these types of topics. And like, you know, if you're sitting in front of your computer, you might be able to pull up a study or something or some kind of, you know, source that can back up the claim that you're making. When you're just sitting there, you know, in a concert hall and you're just answering questions back and forth like that, like, how are you going to pull up that information very quick and easily there? Like, you can't. And so they're hoping that they can trip them up in order to make it seem like, oh, they're just pulling shit out of their ass. So
Norse. There was a female skeleton that was buried with traditionally...
Sipping My Mojo in the chat says, my thoughts are to be whatever you want to be. I'm happy for you. Yeah, that's how it should be. Even if you don't understand what it means to be a trans person or what things like gender dysphoria are and stuff like that, I feel like that's the right approach. You don't have to be an expert on trans people to respect them and to think that their existence is valid, you know? Just at the end of the day, they're people and they should be treated like people just like anybody else. So I never understand these people who, like, if you go on a platform like Twitter, there are people that all their existence on Twitter is seeking out trans people to harass or being extremely bigoted and things of that nature. Like, that's their only existence on social media. And I don't understand how unhinged of a person you have to be for that to be your existence. They're just people. Just treat them like fucking people, even if you don't understand it. You know what I mean?
Male burial rites and clothing.
How do they know the skeleton's female?
Well, I said female because obviously I believe that gender is something social rather than just biological, but
the scientists were able to identify it by the skeleton.
We know that sex is unambiguous.
Yeah.
I don't think we're denying that.
There's this odd idea.
That's another thing. They'll often kind of try to conflate like sex with gender, and sex and gender are not the same thing. They're two completely different things. But yeah.
Conservatives that transgender people don't understand that biological like sex exists or that we're deluded.
Some don't. Some don't. Some do. You obviously do, but some don't.
No.
I mean, I have yet to meet anybody.
I've yet to meet anyone.
I've seen people
who's
clipped out of
genuinely...
context to look like that, but I haven't.
Those people are clipped talking to me. I mean, these are people. I promise you, I've spoken to these people on camera in some cases. But in any case, you don't feel that way.
You're non felt that way.
I'm actually surprised that Knowles uploaded this so far. Demi and her friend are coming off really well. Yeah, they're actually doing really well in this. You know, typically what you want to see, or what they want to see rather, is they want to be able to like misrepresent the conversation in a way that makes it look like, you know, their guests don't know what the fuck they're talking about, or they're just like looking unhinged, right? Like that's typically the goal. But no, they actually look really well in this conversation. It looks like they're being very respectful during the conversation as well. It's not the typical, like, you know, SJW clip that they'll upload where it looks like an unhinged person that's just there to be triggered and angry, right? It's not that at all. So I have to agree with you. I genuinely think it's kind of interesting that they uploaded this. I will say this, though, and I forgot to show this earlier. Apparently, there was some manipulation of the clips that did happen, though. Let me see if I can find that. I meant to show this earlier and I totally forgot. But here we have the tweet I showed earlier, this is where I referenced the fact that they changed the title. We have this conversation between this person. T is a comics Loki fan, and Demigloom. His face annoys me for some reason, so I don't want to watch the video. Can you tell me how that went? Laughing my ass off. The whole conversation was him mischaracterizing what we said and us clarifying what we meant and him saying, oh, okay. So it just, the conversation is just kind of weird. But in any case, let's continue.
You're non-binary.
Uh-huh.
You said that you came to this realization at 14.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think kind of pushed you over that edge at 14?
I think intense emotional distress at the prospect of needing to navigate through life being someone's daughter, someone's sister, someone's girlfriend, someone's wife, someone's mother. That's just something that wasn't really a role that I wanted to fill, and a role that I felt intensely distressed at the prospect of needing to fulfill.
Why is that?
I think, like, you know, I mentioned earlier that, like, while I do respect, obviously I respect non-binary people and I think that their identity is valid, I did mention that, you know, I'm not super understanding of what it means to be, like, non-binary. Like, I can wrap my head around the concept of what it means to be, you know, a trans woman or a trans man. But when it comes to non-binary, that's where things get a little bit hazy for me. I think I'd like to potentially try to look into that a little bit more in the future and try to understand what it means to be non-binary or identify as non-binary, or what a person feels like when they come to the conclusion that they are non-binary. I'm genuinely interested in learning more about that.
It's difficult to explain, and it would be difficult to explain in a very short period of time. It's just one of those things that you feel deep down in your soul.
You mean it would be difficult to explain even to yourself, or you're just saying it would be difficult to articulate this thing that I understand?
It's difficult to articulate. It's kind of an abstract thing.
The cause of gender dysphoria and this discomfort with your sex assigned at birth in these roles is still pretty widely debated, even in the woke scientific community.
Right. And there would seem to be, even among the pro-trans kind of woke, a presumed plurality, or multiplicity rather, of causes. Like some people can fall into this as a bit of a sexual fetish.
That isn't transgender, though. That's
some guys who dress up like women will openly state that they're the Wachowski brothers, who are now the Wachowski sisters, said they fell into their transgender identity largely through pornography, and others will say that as well. Now, you might say, well, it wasn't pornography. It was because of, you know, I wanted to wear a dress when I was 4 years old or something. But I'm just saying, in some cases, it would appear to be more of a sexual fetish. For some people, it might be called.
Yeah, see, like I said, they really want to make it a degeneracy thing so they can try to invalidate it. And I see somebody asking me to hydrate. Okay, I will hydrate. Thank you very much for that. I appreciate it. But yeah, just trying to invalidate it as some form of degeneracy.
Caused by some emotional distress. For some people, it might be caused by any number of other factors. Again, I'm just repeating what I've heard from the left. I'm not even stating.
I mean, the
I
material.
don't think the left says that.
The material.
No, the Wachowski brothers certainly do. You know, and they're
Two
trans.
people.
The most famous
the material
transgender identifying
presence
people in the
of
world.
somebody wearing
That is
a dress with a male body.
wildly false.
The material presence of a man in a woman's dress perhaps could come about as a sexual fetish. I think we agree on that, but I don't think that. I think what we're trying to say is that that's a very different thing than we're describing.
No, but I guess that's what I'm saying too. That there are these. So we all agree there are these different causes for this kind of identity. There's so much more to say. First, though, go to preborn.com/no.
No, thank you. We'll skip your ad. I'm not interested in your ad. Okay, let's get back to. Here we go. Okay, let's continue.
As late as you can. Preborn.com/Knowles. You came not to talk about transgenderism. You asked me about abortion.
Mm-hmm.
So you support abortion.
Absolutely.
And you support it. Do you support abortion? We didn't even talk about it, even though this is the point. You do?
Yeah.
You won't need one, though.
No. I won't need an abortion anytime.
And you might not either, because you're transgender or non-binary.
Do you believe that transgender people are all celibate?
I'm just a little confused as to what non-binary means.
Non-binary means I am not a man or a woman, regardless of what parts I was bestowed.
Okay. What you're saying is your body has nothing to do with whether you're a man or a woman.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think often,
Yeah, it's your gender identity. It's not your body doesn't determine what you identify gender-wise.
Sometimes the gender identity does describe a relationship to one's body. For example,
Uber says, I can't believe you aborted the ad. True. I'm not interested in his ad. I'm not being paid to run that shit.
you know, if I were to say I am a transgender woman, I'm directly asserting that I am
Yeah, exactly. As trans girl Jade in the chat pointed out, sex is not equivalent to gender.
a woman and that I have, you know, male genitalia.
Or you could have gone
chromosomes.
under the knife and lost your male genitalia.
I could have. Yeah.
So you could be asserting that too. So I guess that's what I'm saying. It seems like you could just, all of these terms just mean kind of whatever you want them to mean.
No, not really.
It's
Pretty
just-
concrete definition.
So you just said to be a transgender woman, I have to be wearing a dress or look like this, but
I didn't say I have to. I said that's just how I like
what's
to
the
express it.
concrete definition of a transgender woman?
Somebody who is assigned male at birth who identifies and pursues womanhood.
Okay. And what is womanhood? Not to sound like Walsh, but what is womanhood then? What does that
Womanhood?
mean in that statement?
I would describe womanhood as a very subjective
But you just
concept.
also said we're talking about things that are concrete, and that's all. I'm just trying to grab onto something. What is the actual definition of the thing that you are using to define transgenderism?
I would describe womanhood as a set of characteristics associated with females, usually.
But that's
removed from
that's a
sex.
circular definition, and even the way you said it, you
No,
said
it's not.
I would describe, but I'm not asking you to describe anything.
Yeah, typically like it's based on like social norms that you would typically associate with, you know, a specific gender. So like if you're talking about a woman, for example, you know, what do you think of in our society when you think of like a woman? You think of somebody who, you know, probably most likely has longer hair, somebody who might wear makeup, somebody who might wear a dress. You know, these are the things that we associate within our society with someone who might identify as a woman. So if somebody is a transgender woman, they will often, you know, partake in these sorts of things that we would normally associate with like womanhood in society. It's all based on societal things that make us view someone as a woman. So if, you know, somebody who was born a man but transitions to a woman and identifies as a woman, those are the type of things that they'll typically, not always, but typically engage in if they identify as a woman. Like it's really not, it all comes down to identity. It's really not that difficult to wrap your head around. They just try to overcomplicate it, you know?
Asking if you can offer a definition, because it gets to the heart of your identity, which is that you're 4 years old, you say, I don't really feel like a man. How would you even know what that would mean at the age of 4? And how would you know what that would mean now to feel like a woman?
Because there are a variety of traditions associated with the male and female sex, and I've decided that I'd rather subscribe to the ones associated with the female sex.
But how would you even know what that is?
How would I even know what the traditions associated with the female sex are?
I feel like, you know, a lot of people often like try and make it seem like children are just dumber than they actually are. Children are actually very smart. And children are very aware of a lot of things that they may not be able to put into words what it is that they're feeling, but children are a lot smarter than a lot of people tend to think. Like, I feel like, obviously I'm not transgender, but if I had to guess based on like conversations I've had with, you know, transgender people, say somebody who was born male and they later in life transitioned to being female, and they talk about the fact that, you know, when I was a child, I started to notice there was something different about me. And that's usually the way they'll describe it. There was something different about me. They weren't 100% sure at the time what it was, but they knew something was different. And sometimes they'll describe it as something along the lines of, I found myself more interested in like female clothing rather than male clothing. Or I found myself looking up to female role models more so than looking up to male role models. Or maybe I was interested in, you know, activities that were more focused towards females rather than males, etc. These are the kind of things that I've heard a lot from people who later in life transitioned. These are the kind of like experiences they describe within their childhood. Does that make sense? Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, they could be
I
just a
know that.
caricature.
I know that mom stays at home and that dad goes to work. I know that all.
But you would disagree with that.
No,
You said you reject those roles.
I understand.
Is this video going to be the usual try to dunk on the LGBTQ plus community vids? I'm surprised there hasn't been any mention of trans athletes due to that being a big dunk for people who make these videos. Essentially what happened is that Michael Knowles had a bit of one of those like presentations. I guess the main topic of the presentation was abortion. and he was presenting at this school, but he also did like an open questionnaire thing, which they often do at the end, where people can come up and ask questions. And a couple of the people who pushed back against Michael Knowles during that question and answer session was Demi and her friend. And so they decided, hey, these are like the only two people who really pushed back against me here. I want to invite them on to do an interview to discuss the things they brought to my attention a little bit more. So in the case of Demigloom brought up their thoughts on, being transgender. And in the case of Demigloom's friend, whose name is escaping me at the moment, my apologies if you happen to be watching this, they brought up, the topic, which was the main topic of the presentation, which was abortion. And so they're focusing specifically on those topics. I haven't watched this video yet, so I don't know if trans athletes comes into the conversation. But the goal for Michael Knowles is very clearly to dunk on, people who are pro-abortion and pro-trans rights. It's the typical thing you would see from, the Daily Wire types.
What a traditional gender role is, I don't reject that it as a concept exists. I'm not comfortable with these social expectations, therefore I am going to adhere to different social expectations that are generally assigned to the opposite sex. Yeah, it is.
No, you're not.
I'm saying it right now.
Well, now you are, but that's not previously what you said. Previously what you said was, there are these different social expectations associated with being a woman, and I so wanted to avoid them that I no longer call myself a woman. Not that a woman can avoid those social expectations, but rather that the social expectations are so intrinsic to womanhood that I will no longer be a woman. I will be a non-binary they.
Where the fuck are your glasses?
I don't know. Where are my glasses? Oh, they're right there. Okay. Mommy Jade is telling me that I need to wear my glasses. My apologies, okay? Shout out to Mommy Jade for keeping me in check on that. I'm also being told by eFozzy to hydrate, so I'll go ahead and do that too. Thank you very much. I do appreciate that.
Coping and seething.
Thank you very much for that.
Accept what you're seeing. Yes, you're coping.
Okay.
And seething. The truth is
it's true. Michael Knowles is coping and seething.
Coping so hard.
I fucking hate everyone.
Let's continue.
You see the conflict, the contradiction there.
Yes, I understand where your confusion came from. So I don't want to.
Nice argument. Why don't you back it up with a source?
My source is that I made it the fuck up.
Thank you very much, Winter Rose. I do appreciate that.
Generally pushed onto women. And I also feel intense discomfort when being called with feminine pronouns, when being called a woman, when being perceived as a woman.
Yeah.
And I understand those things aren't necessarily under my control, so, water off a duck's back. But I feel discomfort with that, therefore I choose to reject it.
Okay. Would you...
What a fucking
just to tie it
Weasley
up on
little liar, dude.
Thank you very much for that.
I don't want to spend the whole time talking about the issue that you wanted to talk about. Would you ever get an abortion?
I could come up with a circumstance in which I would. I highly doubt that such a circumstance would arise.
Why wouldn't you?
Mostly just because those circumstances, I've never been pregnant. I do not foresee being pregnant in my future.
Okay, but why wouldn't you in principle, I guess?
In principle, I have no issues with it. Past certain points of development, I do believe you can start ascribing personhood to a fetus.
What would the point be then? Because you said, look,
I feel like his intent with asking that question was to try and make the argument of something along the lines of like, well, if you wouldn't get an abortion, then why are you pro-abortion? Doesn't that really seem hypocritical? And no, that's not the case. You might support somebody's right to pursue an abortion, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that you yourself would want or need an abortion. So just because you might not necessarily need one yourself, or you might not be interested in getting one yourself, it doesn't mean that you don't support the rights of someone else having the ability to do so, right?
To There's a point at which I would start to ascribe personhood, and then presumably you wouldn't have the abortion. So what is that point?
I'm not a doctor. And you know,
you like that grin. They had to show that grin because it's like, you're not a doctor, so you don't actually know what the fuck you're saying. Just because you might not understand like the biology behind something or like the science behind something, it doesn't mean that your feelings on supporting someone's rights are invalid. But that's what that smirk meant. He didn't even have to say any words there. You knew exactly what he meant when he had that expression on his face.
It isn't something that I've considered very much because, again, I don't foresee myself being pregnant.
Sure. But you intuit. I mean, you're obviously concerned about the issue of abortion. You showed up to this lecture tonight to ask me this long question about it. So you intuit that there is some point, at least, in gestation where the baby would be a person and then it would be kind of wrong to abort the baby. So
that's me personally.
Yeah, so I'm asking about your personal opinion.
That anyone should be forced to give up their bodily autonomy to save the life of another person, even if you're considering a fetus to be a baby, even if you're considering
so even if it is a baby
from the beginning.
So then why did you bring up the personhood thing? You just said, look, I would...
That's how I feel. But I don't believe that the way that I feel should necessarily decide what other people do with their bodies and their lives.
You don't think that your conclusions are sound? You don't think that you perceive the truth?
I'm just not...
You don't think your logic is too good?
I think that believing that my perspective is universally correct, I think that that's hubris. I'm a human being.
But you came here to tell me that my views are wrong and your views are right.
I do believe that people have the right to self-determination very firmly.
But you would force me to live in a society that tolerates abortion.
I don't think that you're being personally affected by that.
That doesn't affect you at all. You might be someone who might decide that, you know, for you or your spouse or partner or whatever, that like abortion isn't something that you guys want to take part in. But I don't think that thank you very much for that. I do appreciate that. I don't think that like that should necessarily mean that because you don't want to have access to something that other people shouldn't have access to that or the right to partake in that, etc.
That it's not affecting your right to self-determination. It's not affecting the way that you live your life.
Right. So you're forcing me to base my political judgments on your conception of self-determination. Don't you think that's a little coercive? Isn't that a little bit of hubris that you're showing here?
Well, this is odd. Wait, I'm not even I'm not sure you're saying much at all. Could you repeat what you were saying? Try and be more specific.
Yes, you previously said that it's a demonstration of pride and hubris for you to take your own personal judgments and impose them and universalize them to everyone else. And then in the very next breath, you said that your views of bodily autonomy and self-determination ought to apply to everyone, and we all ought to abide by them. That's why you came here to tell me that I'm wrong and you're right. That's a contradiction.
It's not a contradiction. It's not a contradiction to say that people should have the right to make these decisions for themselves. And then, like, if you choose not to make those decisions in your own life, then you're free. That's what this is all about. This isn't about, like, forcing people to get abortions or anything like that. This is about the freedom of choice. People should be free to make that choice for themselves. And if someone like Michael Knowles and his family decide that, you know, abortion, it's not something we want to do, you can make that choice. And if somebody in their life decides, hey, you know what, this was, you know, a pregnancy that was, you know, it was created out of, you know, a sexual assault type situation, or like, you know, whatever the reasoning may be, you just decide that I need an abortion for this reason or that reason or whatever. It's about choice. You get to choose what you want to do with your own body, right? And that's what it's about. Nobody's forcing you to do anything but make your own choices. And I don't understand what is wrong with that.
I also believe in democracy, and the majority of Americans side with me. They believe in the right to bodily... Yes.
I'm not so sure. I mean, after Roe v. Wade was overruled, half of the states imposed limitations on abortion or banned it outright. That's democracy for you, isn't it?
Are you under the impression that we live in an absolute democracy?
No,
where
we live in a
whatever
representative democracy.
Yeah, we do live in a representative democracy, and those representatives their actions do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the people that they represent.
So you support democracy in principle, just not ours.
I support democracy.
But not our democracy.
I support our democracy.
Well, we have a representative democracy, and you just said that the
You're putting a whole lot of
representatives.
words in my mouth.
I think I'm just repeating what you said, and I'm trying to.
You're not.
Thank you, NJ Trashboy.
You just said that you support democracy, and I said, okay, well, in our democracy, half the states decided to severely limit or outright ban abortion.
Thank you.
And you said, well, you're assuming that we're a direct democracy. I said, no, we're a representative democracy.
I didn't say that we were a direct. I was explaining to you that
right,
we do not live in a direct
that's
democracy.
That's what I'm saying, right? But then I said, right, we live in a representative democracy, and you said, well, that's not representative of the people. But then what that would mean is you support some kind of democracy in theory, but you don't support the actual one we have here, which outlaws abortion in half the states after Roe v. Wade is overruled.
I prefer democracy to actually genuinely represent the feelings and best interests of the people living in that democracy.
What if 50%
Every
plus?
once in a while, do you
50% plus?
believe the government, do you 100% agree with the government of the United States on everything all the time?
No, I sometimes.
And would that mean that you hate democracy in America?
No, I think sometimes most people disagree with me. But that doesn't mean that I would sacrifice my view and the rightness or wrongness of my view to the mob or something like 50% plus one. If 50% plus one of the electorate came out and said that abortion is murder and we're going to ban it in all circumstances, would you still support democracy?
Of course.
You would.
Democracy, what is that Winston Churchill quote?
That's the worst form of government other than all the other ones that have been tried.
Yes.
Yeah. So you would support that.
Absolutely.
We just got to convince 50% plus one of the people, and you would be the biggest pro-lifer in the country, ban abortion everywhere.
I mean, I wouldn't agree with it, but I would live with it.
You would live with it. That's good.
I mean, like, that's ultimately what democracy is, right? You vote for the opinions that matter most to you, right? And then if more people vote in favor of a particular decision, then that's the one that wins out. Like, that's the idea behind it. So, like, yeah, you can be pro-democracy and maybe an ideal that you support doesn't win because of that democracy, and still support that democracy. I don't see that as like a contradiction, which is what he seems to try and be making it into.
I believe in imposing my beliefs on others. If the majority believes that abortion is murder, then obviously I'd be forced to go along with that. I don't believe in political violence. What would I do? That would be horrifying. No.
Wow, great. All right, so maybe I convinced you a little bit in my talk then.
No.
What? No.
It sounds like I did. But
no. Just because she says she supports democracy doesn't mean you convinced her of anything. What?
Saying that I'm not against political violence doesn't mean.
You said you would support.
I wouldn't try and
support the outlawing of abortion if most people wanted it.
I don't think they're saying that they would totally comply with the social acceptability of being pro-life. I think they would still try to convince people within the marketplace of ideas what they believe in.
Okay, so you wouldn't accept what the majority.
I think when they say it,
you just try to convince them otherwise.
Yes.
I think they're trying to say they wouldn't override democracy with political violence. They're not saying that.
Oh, well, that's
within
good.
the market.
No one had suggested that.
Yeah,
that would have been terrible. Demi, thank you very much.
It's great to talk to you,
Ferris. I don't know whether or not I ultimately convinced Demi and Ferris.
I don't think so
yet either. But
I don't think you've convinced them of anything. I don't think that anything you said is going to change their mind. I will say it was nice to see them have a civilized conversation about this, because too many times these conversations devolve into like, just like screaming over each other and like, just it doesn't turn out well. So it was nice to see a civilized conversation happen, but at the same time, it's like, no, you weren't going to convince them to see things your way.
I am sure of is that their willingness to sit down to discuss a disagreement was much more impressive.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. I do appreciate that.
Than the university administrators' desperate attempts to keep me off campus. As my YAF campus tour continues.
I don't see, so he mentioned like, what was it, the security fee at the beginning? I don't see them imposing a security fee as them trying to like kick him off the campus. That's not what that was. They're just saying, hey, there's a lot of people who aren't too fond of you here, so maybe we might want to hire some more security to keep you safe on our campus.
I hope to find more students like Demi and Ferris who are willing to cross the picket line to hear what conservatives think and maybe even muster the courage to talk about these topics face to face.
All right, so that's pretty much the video there. Shout out to Demigloom, and what was her friend's name? Ferris? Something like that? Thank you so much for that. So yeah, I thought it was pretty good, actually. I expected that to be a little bit more, like some more conflict there, but it was actually kind of nice to see that they were able to have a civilized conversation and not get too aggressive with each other. Obviously, there were disagreements, and I disagree a lot with, you know, the kind of things that Michael Knowles believes, but even so, it was still very nice to see them have a civilized conversation, so good for them. And again, shout out to Demigloom and their friend. I believe their friend's name was Ferris or something along the lines of that. My apologies if I got that wrong, but there you go. There you go.
Play that shit!
Tipster! A good dude! Tipster!